Welcome, everybody.
Welcome.
As we get started, if everyone could rename themselves, their name and their company name, we are going to go into breakouts, and it's always easier to be able to, and those that are in the room that have agreed to be moderators today, if you could add moderator to your title, that would be amazing. And I'm just going to keep letting people in. And Joy, if you want to.
Sure. Did you want me to give you another minute to let everyone in, or are we good?
Yeah, we can.
Start. Okay, we're going to start. For everybody that's here on time, you get rewarded with starting on time. So welcome back, everybody, to FMForward 2021. We're going to jump right in. We would like to thank Corporate Care, 4-Point Project Managers, Margulies Peruzzi, Timberline Construction, and VVA Project and Cost Managers for their help in underwriting this year's conference. So thank you to all of them. We warmed you up yesterday with breakouts, so you should be experts by now. Each session during the conference will have 1 to 3 sessions today. We will work to put you into groups each time, and for the remainder of the week, you will be joined in your room by one of our exhibiting members, a volunteer, or a board member, who will help facilitate the questions provided by our speaker. Janessa will send the question to your room as well, and you don't forget it like I normally do. If you find yourself in a room with a designated moderator, please just select someone or raise your hand and say, that will be me. Throughout the next few days, if you have any questions for our speakers, please visit the community and add it to the thread created for each talk. You can search the questions by topics. One last thing, each of our sessions will have an FM overtime. It's a roundtable specifically for our FMs in IFMA. It's on a different Zoom at the conclusion of each session. So if you are an FM and you have not received this invite to the private room for the networking after, please email Janessa and she will send it to you, or email me because I also have it. Okay, now let me introduce you to this morning's speaker. Please help me in welcoming Kibibi Springs, the Workplace Wellbeing Knowledge Lead for the Eastern US and New York City at Herman Miller. Her full bio can be found in your show guide in the swag box you received. Take it away, Kibibi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so proud of everyone for waking up on time. I hope everyone's got a big cup of coffee and they're ready to go. We should have a lot of fun in this because this is a super relevant topic for everyone. As she said, I am a workplace wellbeing knowledge lead or subject matter expert on workplace wellbeing for Herman Miller. I'm also a PhD student entering my last quarter of dissertation and defense. And my studies are focused around through the lens of technostress and break characteristics. So, as they say, they who study suffer from the thing that they study. And that is the case for me. This is a topic that is personally ingratiating. And I dive into the research to understand a little bit more about how technology is affecting our ability to be well and to rest and to, ideally to get breaks throughout the day. So what I'm proposing as our push forward is a really intentional push towards tech healthy workplaces, because it's quite clear that we are going to be working with multiple devices ongoing, and we only know some of them that will enter our world. And when we honor healthy workplaces in that way, we're honoring the physical, cognitive, and social ergonomics of people. So if you've not heard of those 3 branches of ergonomic research, this is how we're going to kind of frame up this discussion today. And that's Herman Miller's point of view. It's a very holistic approach around how we integrate the whole person into the ultimate ergonomic setting, so to speak. So something that supports the body and its physical needs, but also supports really quality thinking, creative thinking, and then how ergonomics can facilitate good social dynamics. And technology has introduced some new and unique things that we need to be thinking about. So during our time together, I'm going to share some thoughts about the moment that we're currently in and the place that technology has taken in all of our lives, and then how technology is going to play a role in the well-being of the workforce of the future. And then as we close, I'll give some considerations that you can take back to your organizations. And you guys are also going to come up with your own considerations of things that I'm sure you've thought about already, about how we can be using technology as we transition and return to the office and all of the places that we will be working in the future. And how we'll use that to, in a healthier way, to keep ourselves connected, collaborative, and productive along the way. So here we go. This particular quote really resonated to me because it really kind of solidifies the moment that we're in. And this is not a new quote. So that's what's interesting about it, is that we will use technology to solve the problems the use of technology creates, but the new fixes will bring new issues. And I think that we have seen that. We've seen technology really save us in this time of distance work, where we couldn't be together, and to facilitate some miraculous things in regards to pushing business forward. But in the process, it has also created some challenges for us that we couldn't have predicted would happen. And so our interplay with technology has a new point of view individually. We see it as something that we have to manage. And so we're going to talk about how we manage that better and how we teach our workforces to manage that better in all three of those buckets. Now, usually when we talk about ergonomics, it is about the physical fit between the furnishings, the surroundings, and the tools that we are going to spend most of our day with to get our work done. And within this time frame of the last year, prior to COVID, we were already very much concerned about movement and getting into good ergonomic postures, but really pushing movement as one of the concerns for the workforce to get on board with. So in the WellAP standards, we see a lot of things that encourage movement in the design of space. But now we're also realizing that it takes some individual responsibility as well. It's not all on the organization. It's a partnership of providing the right things and then also teaching the right things to do. And then when we think about cognitive ergonomics and the mind-body connection, we know that we can't separate the two, right? We are whole beings. And so it makes sense that our physical deterioration over the last year of, trying to get comfortable, trying to get into good ergonomic position has also had some cognitive results that we don't necessarily care for, a lack of focus, too much distraction going on. And so we're really struggling to keep our heads in the game, literally, when it comes to cognitive ergonomics. If you're not familiar with this area of ergonomics, it's really about how the brain processes information. And so it's about getting real with what the capabilities of our brains are. They do have a limited capacity for processing information. And sometimes, actually quite often, we overload it. Sorry about that. We overload it with too many details and too many things to dive into. And thus we are not getting the best out of our brains when we do that. When we think about any social discomfort coming into play, that's stealing from our cognitive capabilities. And so we want to make sure that comfort facilitates good cognitive performance. And then when we move into the social dynamics and how social ergonomics comes into play, it's with the understanding that everything around us is affecting our ability to focus, our ability to feel comfort in our work environment, our ability to collaborate and to be productive. And so that's the people, that's also the environment, it's the things that we work with. Overall, we know that when we feel our best, we work our best. And so trying to keep the human system in this optimal state of well-being really facilitates great business goals for everyone. Technology has really taken a toll on us. It causes us to engage in some very sedentary behavior. So before I go forward, I'd like everyone to answer this question while I talk about some of the ways that technology is shifted. Think about how many devices do you work with on a daily basis? And there should be a poll coming up for you to share. And I want you to think about all of the technology that you touch on a daily basis to facilitate your work, to communicate with others, whether they are at work or in your home or maybe in your community. And so as you're doing that, we'll talk a little bit about that physical and cognitive connection. We spend a lot of time on screens, which puts us in a very sedentary position most of the time, unless we are extremely intentional about changing that sedentary position. So we have activities that require technology in order to facilitate them in some kind of way. And thank God for that, right? Because we all would have been in a very different space coming into this year if we hadn't had that. But they are adding up to some ergonomic complications. We've got a lot of chronic eye fatigue. We've got those excessive sedentary behaviors. About 5 years ago, they said our sedentary behavior was up 80% from 50 years ago. So during the stay-at-home orders and the quarantine time, that sedentary behavior became something to really contend with because our footprint to get a walk-in became maybe much smaller or more restricted. And then there's the excessive physical strain of using technology, which we'll talk about a little bit. The way that we don't necessarily use it properly all of the time, and a lack of clear understanding about how the body reacts to technology. And then we have this issue of mental overload and overwhelm, which is what technostress is comprised of. So I'll ask right now, do we have any results from that poll? What does it seem to be the average?
So the poll was not able to be launched.
Oh, bummer.
We'll still be working on that because it's a long story, but we'll keep working on it.
That's all right. Well, I can just say for myself, I probably work with about I have 2 laptops, 1 phone, a tablet, several other things that I engage with during the day. I see some things coming through the chat. Are people sharing what they might be using? My brother, I always laugh at him because he has 3 telephones that I can never figure out which one to call him on. 2 of them are for work, 1 is for home. And so we're seeing just this in effort to manage our technology, we are sometimes piling on more technology to help facilitate that. So as we witness in real time this shift into the next iteration of the workplace, we got to be thinking about how we design spaces with people and their tasks with multiple technologies in mind. I rarely enter a situation for an overhaul of a space where someone says, yeah, everyone just uses 1 monitor. Typically the average today is about 2, and I'm starting to see that number increase tremendously. And so when we consider the type of support that needs to be provided for multiple technologies, and also now this thought of multiple spaces. So while some of us may be coming back to work with a full-time seat, many of us are going to be in a hybrid situation where we're transitioning. And so we're going to have to shuttle technology back and forth, but we're also going to need to be able to support it in both spaces. We also need to double down on the ergonomic education. So we tend to do that when we give the new toys, but we don't spend a lot of time making sure that people ongoing know how to use things that have been provided for them. And so when issues start to come up, it tends to sometimes come down to a lack of understanding that what we trained you on was so that you could keep yourself healthy and well along the way, and that those levers are to be changed frequently. And one of the most common questions that I tend to get from like a post-install ergonomic fitting is, am I going to have to change these settings all the time? And my answer is, you will change them according to how you need to feel at any given moment. It is not a set it and forget it in many cases. Sometimes you're going to need a little more recline. Sometimes you will feel like you want to sit straight up. So get used to adjusting your equipment on an ongoing basis. And when we give people the full suite of things to adjust, we're giving them the control of a holistic ergonomic design in their hands. So as we think about the way technology has moved forward, it's also important to think about, I missed something here. It's also important to think about the hyper speed at which technology is moving. So we've got web-enabled devices, we've got 5G coming into play, we've got more requests for increased plug and play capabilities. And we need everything to be very intuitive and consumer end user friendly so that the work progresses and more time is not spent trying to figure out how to use the technology than actually doing the work. We're going to see more touch operating systems, more high definition displays and curved displays. And then we're also seeing this new toy and technology promise of augmented reality. So where we can put on glasses and layer images on top of what we're seeing in real life. This allows us to transport people to places that we cannot be right now. And possibly in the future, it may transport us to each other. It might be the way that we connect in the future to have meetings with people in other offices or those who are working from home while we're in the office. So virtual reality and AR and VR are going to provide some increased connectivity and possibly introduce some different ways of thinking about how we work with technology as well. So with that in mind, let's go into our first breakout room. And I want you to think about, since the beginning of March last year, how has your office or your organization, or maybe something that you've seen someone else's organization do, how have they changed some of their cultural practices and or their workday structure to support people in the way that we are using technology right now? All right.
So we're putting you into breakouts, and we are You should have a moderator. I might be switching few people around once you get in there. If you find yourself in a room without a moderator, I will be sending the question again. So just accept your room.
Hey, Janessa,
Yes.
I actually don't see my name in it. Is everyone back in the room?
Almost.
Okay.
I think so.
Right. So does anyone want to share anything interesting that came out of their discussion as it related to technology, ergonomics, movement, and even focus, which are going to be some of the things I'm going to talk about next? We had a conversation.
Whoops. Whoops, 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 whoops. Oh, Kibibi, I muted you. Oh. Whoops, 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 whoops.
Yeah, everybody got muted. You have to take yourself off.
I'm sorry.
Kibibi, you just have to unmute
Kibibi.
yourself.
I'm sorry.
There we go. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
So
Layers
sorry.
and layers of screens. I was like, where is that at? All right. So I was just asking, were there any interesting things that came up in regards to how they've seen other organizations or your own organization maybe shift policies related to maybe meetings or how much time can be spent at work? Anything interesting? We had a conversation around the allocation of ergonomic equipment for the home, and some very proactive attendees who did assessments for their people while they were at home so they could get comfortable right from the very start, in addition to taking their chairs. But anything anyone wanted to share?
We talked about information security and how that kind of shifted as folks went remote. It was one of the differentiators, I think, in comparison to other conversations, and really just how, you know, folks' homes aren't as secure as company networks. And someone had mentioned, Emily had mentioned her password is now longer than her bank account password in order to get in her job. So I think it speaks to just that shift as well, which is something that folks didn't really think about.
Very much so. Thank you for bringing that up, because we also had, in some cases, a bandwidth issue, right? We didn't realize that we didn't have the top of the line internet maybe until we were forced to do everything by the internet.
A good conversation that we got into was, how did our companies create the culture without being in person, and how are they doing either a happy hour with your companies or health walks, any of those kind of above and beyond, to make sure that we're connecting still to enhance the culture of the company and the people.
And I've heard some really creative ideas from some organizations related to like kind of addressing the affiliations that they all share internally. So if your culture is very much driven by sports, I've heard things where, you know, they would have sports Fridays and everyone would come in their jersey. So we have made do with technology and figured out ways to make this work for connection for certain. Let's move on into talking more about that movement piece. So again, I said that, you know, movement was already a challenge. This is why we were moving to sit to stand desks and opening the floor plate and encouraging people to move around. And the Well AP standards has a lot of things in it that does encourage movement, like no trash receptacles at each desk, but having a central location, which also forces movement throughout the office. So when we think about that increased sitting time that technology puts in. We have to remember that the reason why we don't want people to sit for long periods of time is because that is linked to some of the chronic diseases that we're also trying to prevent in our workforce on the wellness side. So it has been linked to obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancers. And so when we talk about movement, it's not with just, it's not a nice to have, it's an actual need to have. And when we think about movement, we also need to think about it beyond our exercise period. So there are some who might feel like I exercise enough to offset the amount of time that I sit, but that is actually not the case. And so many years ago, that study about sitting being the new smoking, it was to reveal the fact that regardless of what kind of physical habits we have individually, the great equalizer is the amount of time that we sit at work. So if you don't have the capability to sit and stand and move about your office, you are cutting off literally a part of your lifespan. And because that standing and movement, it plays a very unique biological role in our health. If you're familiar with an acronym called NEAT, NEAT, it's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And so it is everything that we do with the exception of exercise or in addition to the exercise that we do that really keeps us healthy. And this type of movement has been studied and is known to increase longevity. So if you're familiar with the Blue Zones organization that studies centenarians all over the world and what keeps us alive for 100 years or more, that is one of the key elements is that people who live long lives, they get a ton of movement into their day. And so when we think about, American society, we're very car bound, some of us do take walks and take public transportation, but for the most part, we are very sedentary. And so we have an extra emphasis on needing to remember that movement is going to help with our longevity. And so it's very easy to implement that movement. It's just about developing that habit. And I do, yes.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
When we went to the breakouts, your screen stopped sharing. So could you reshare, please?
We're winning today.
Yeah, so it's 8 a.m. Everyone we're all
Okay.
just working through this.
Let's see. Let me go back here. All right, how about now, everybody?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, well, that's good because I was just about to talk about this study here. So we've talked about all of the many ways in which, sitting is deteriorating our health. If we were to implement just 2 minutes of gentle walking, I'm not even talking a power walk here, we could improve our longevity tremendously. So they found that those who substituted just 2 minutes of gentle walking into their hour of each day, they lowered their risk of premature death by 33%. And I think that's a very compelling statistic, but it literally is starting to boil down to, we might need to tell our people that this is what we're dealing with here when we talk about, a lack of movement and what the implications could be on the back end. So that has to do with sitting at the desk. And then we have the technology that is really putting a strain on our eyes and our vision. I myself have noticed that in this last year, I think when I go back to the ophthalmologist, I'm going to need to bump up my prescription just a bit. My vision actually, decreased a level during this year because of all of the technical dependence. I've had my first issues of eye strain where your eyes get very dry and itchy. And so learning how to take breaks with technology and to cycle the technology in ways that are productive for our senses to really optimize at their best. And then also remembering that we have a physical and a cognitive connection. So when we experience eye strain, that's likely taking us away from the work that we're doing. It's causing a slowdown in productivity, possibly more than just an hour or 30 minutes or so. It could be about, it could take us some time to recover. And so when we think about monitor arms and task lights to support our technology, and even what the devices of the future will be ergonomically to support things like our tablets and our mobile phones, multiple technologies as well, we think about what's going to make it easier on the eyes. And so education is one of those things. What are the right pieces of equipment to help your vision out? Task lights, monitor arms. But then there's also the physical breaks that we need to take for our vision. And so that Teach Vision Council's 2020-20 rule, it still applies. If you ask sporadically, how many of you actually do that throughout the day? You probably get very different numbers. But if you can take that 20-second break to look about 20 minutes, every 20 minutes to look 20 feet away, that can really help our eyes to go the distance throughout a day. And when we are using our equipment in the right way, it also helps to keep our posture upright and to make sure that our sight line is, our bowling ball is on top of our shoulders, and that we're not putting any excessive strain on the spine, but giving people the autonomy to choose the things that they need in their environment. When we're talking about working from home, that might be very different things than we have considered when we were thinking about the office. So now let's talk about technology and how it helped us to collaborate and what it's going to mean in the future. If we've got a hybrid workforce and distributed teams, aligning the furniture and tools is going to mean something a little bit different, but it's still going to be about enabling trust between the people who are collaborating together, making sure that there's good engagement and workflow. And so we've seen some of the things that can happen with technology. You think you're sharing and you find out, halfway through a slide that you're not sharing. And so that is disrupting the equality of the conversation on the other side of the screen. So making sure that our audio-visual considerations, and yes, we did test all of this before we came on with you all, but there's still things that happen in the middle of the meetings that can make it difficult for everyone to concentrate. But as we think about, some of the team maybe being at home, some of the team being together in a video conference room, here are some thoughts about what will make that physical distance that's happening in that space, that physical space, more palatable for those on the other side of the screen, and making sure that everyone is able to participate in the meeting. So one has to do with video conferencing equipment and how people are able to fluidly share and exchange ideas between each other. We also have this need now for more multi-zone audio, because if people are going to be spaced out more in the room, we're going to need to pick up voices and have them be very distinctive from wherever they are sitting in a room. We need microphones that really distinguish human voices. We're going to talk a little bit about how to, ease the strain on the body. Dictation and using some of the technology to dictate instead of type could help to ease up that physical strain, but we need those microphones to be able to clearly and distinctly hear what it is that the person is saying, so that it's spelling things right and that there's not a lot of editing to do on the other side. And then when we think about how that physical accommodation helps our cognitive performance, it's really about making sure that everyone has some autonomy about how they're going to attend meetings where there are multiple people in the future. Just because we are all getting vaccinated and, well, we're not all getting vaccinated, but some of us may choose to get vaccinated. Some of us may have to come back to the office. Others may have more of a hybrid experience. But giving people some autonomy over how they're going to participate and having that be okay as far as the cultural practices is going to go a long way. It's going to make sure that people feel like whatever choice they make, they're still included in the conversation. And we may even need to address that as part of our cultural policies, because we know we do have in-group and out-group dynamics. So we might need to re-up on the education of how to keep people included in this new norm of distributed workplaces and designing engagement between digital engagement with people who are not in the same room. We all need control over how much light and noise is in our personal home space, but also in those office spaces that we might be collaborating in the future. And then when we're collaborating, collaboration might not look like 4 or 5 people in one space. It might look like more one person collaborating with someone virtually. And so all of the tools that we like to use when we collaborate, those analog tools, as well as the digital tools, need to be very fluid. So we might see more furniture moving around the space to accommodate those collaborations, even if it is just with one person. And that one person might then need to flex and go do a meeting with 3 or 4 people, and they might be taking those tools with them. So be thinking about how easy it will be for people to create the environment that they need in any given moment in the space that they're in. And then we also might think about how technology is going to allow us to get some data about the real estate floor print that we have. So if you have meeting reservation software, that is going to be great for your end users, because it's going to free up their cognitive mind space to not have to think about whether or not they're going to have what they need when we get there. So if you've got distributed workforces choosing to come into the office, possibly, ideally we'd want them to be able to choose on a whim It's not a day that I decided I wanted to go in, but now I've decided that the work that I'm doing could be better facilitated in the office. So being able to pick out the room that you need with the right equipment or no equipment, and to know that that is going to be available when you get there in real time is going to make the difference between how our offices are activated. And in addition, that material or those equipment pieces are going to give you some utilization understanding. They're going to tell you what the popular equipment is. It's also going to tell you which configurations are being used the most and if there is any broken equipment in those spaces that you need to fix. So we've been hearing a lot about collaboration out in the world. People want to come back to the office to collaborate, but I think there is an equally important driving force for people as well, and that is focus. And that has often been an overlooked asset on the floor plate. So when we think about facilitating that physical, cognitive, and social benefit to people, sometimes it might be a tech-free environment entirely. There are people at home who are struggling with too many people in their environment and too many devices calling their attention. And so they might see the office space as a way to get away from all of that and to get some really focused work accomplished. One thing that we might see popping up more frequently on the floor plate is a space for total quiet. That might be for quiet work. It might be for a space for meditation. It could possibly be a space to rest and take a nap to replenish your energy. And the research shows that when we have spaces that have acoustical conditions that enhance focus, there's less stress on the part of the end user. They have very much increased performance. They perceive the environment to have less disturbances, and there's increased subjective comfort. So if they feel like it fits their needs, then they feel much more comfortable there. In addition, I talked about using voice recognition to ease up some of the physical strain on the body. Well, if we're going to be using voice recognition, we're going to need quiet spaces for people to talk out loud and to have that dictation happen. And that may not be supported in an open floor plan. So floor plates that have some space for focus might be just as popular as the spaces that are going to be used for collaboration. And so we want to make sure that we have some completely private spaces for short-term use. We might need to make sure that there are more headphones provided or that can be borrowed around the floor plate, good quality headphones, and that we're designing with focus in mind as much as we are designing for collaboration in mind as well. So one thing to keep in mind about focus is that when we get disrupted, it takes about 23 minutes on average to get back into our productive task that we were working on before. And a lot of the distraction does happen from ourselves, but some of it does happen from what's going on around us and whatever the cultural norm is for interrupting people and breaking in for an impromptu collaboration. So now that we are thinking about how technology is kind of scrambling our brains, making it fight for attention, we know how it is helping to add a little stress to our physical. In the next breakout, we're going to ask you to be a little inventive. There are many things that we have to support ourselves in this environment, but I think there are also many things that have yet to be brought up, addressed, and or created. So in this next breakout, I want you to think about what types of tools should we be using more often that we already have, or what needs to be invented to really support performance and well-being when we're in the offices and when we are working collaboratively from distributed locations. And that is the next breakout.
Excellent. Kibibi, how much time do you want to leave after? Like, how long do you want everyone to go into this breakout?
Let's go into this one for about 7 to 8 minutes.
Perfect. Excellent. And here we go. And would you like to, and you can pick whatever room you want.
Hello.
Welcome back.
I'm going to reshare my screen again.
That's our lesson for this morning.
It was a great lesson. Is everyone seeing everything now? Is it back up?
It's in a
Yes.
split screen
Okay.
format.
Yeah, wrong monitor.
Awesome. Wrong monitor?
Oh,
Yeah,
you're in the split screen.
Yeah, presentation mode.
Oh. Hold on. There we go. How
Perfect.
about now? Perfect. Awesome. All right. So what crazy ideas did anyone come up with? We had some good ones in our group.
We can see your notes again.
We had
I need
two
those.
I know you do.
Hold on,
we
let me
had two
correct-
people actually say that they wanted a clone. That was the invention. A clone of
They wanted a
themselves.
what?
A clone of themselves.
Ah.
Now that we didn't come up with.
I'd like
One.
to have predictive mute button, so when I'm about to say something stupid or offensive, they can mute me.
I'd like to have a mute button for other people.
I do that
But-
often in meetings. believe it
That's
or
the
not.
hang up button.
Mhm. We talked about being able to almost go into one, having a virtual world, not necessarily our backgrounds, but how do you walk into a different environment or feel like you're in a different space, or even in your previous office space, right? So how do you connect those synergies between your home office and your previous office, or somewhere that you really want to go into other than just a static background where it was more 3D?
Fantastic. So we're using technology in new ways. I think we're going to see, is my screen up the right way now? Or is everyone looking?
Yes.
Now? Okay. Well, subconscious, very self-conscious there. All right. So I think that there's a lot of room, obviously, to grow as we're learning how technology, when someone brought up the security issue earlier, it reminded me that early on in using Zoom, does everyone remember the Zoom bombs that were happening? And people were very afraid to even use the technology because they didn't know what might happen in the middle of their presentation. So I think that that is an indicator that, you know, all these things don't necessarily work seamlessly, but we're working on it. And the other day there was even, I guess, an upgrade that happened on Teams and everyone's Teams meetings went down. So there will be other things to contend with. Again, going back to that original quote that, you know, we will be fixing the challenges that technology creates, even though technology is helping us out so much during this time frame. So I just want to take a moment to kind of recap some of the research around where technology is kind of heading, giving us some physical challenge and some mental challenges. And so one of the things that I studied again is rest breaks. And so the studies do show that, especially with technology workers, and I think we are all technology workers today, that daily rest periods do play a very essential role, not just in how productive a person is going to be that day, but it actually has some effect on the way that they're going to sleep at night. So if we think about that, that makes it much more compelling to tell people to take care of themselves throughout the day. But I think people sometimes don't even know what that take care means because we're so used to just being on all the time and being available. But a daily rest period could include a stretch break. So looking into, you know, really starting to push forward ergonomic stretch breaks. We tell people to take a break and walk around, but we don't necessarily tell them to stretch out the parts of their body that are getting very tight from sitting for long periods of time, or even from the postures that are, you know, our bodies take when we are working with technology and we're super focused. And so that can go a long way. And then additionally, when it comes to the mental and social issues, all of the social networking systems that we use, not just the ones at work, we've got our computers to get work done, but then we've got all these internal communication pathways that are happening, our cell phones with text messages, social media. And so that is, to some sense, it can make us very counterintuitively productive. So we think we're being productive, but it's actually having the opposite effect. And that is because once our brain hits a capacity limit, then what we're doing is really just spinning our wheels. So we need to make sure that we are only giving the brain enough to process for it to be optimally effective and productive, and not too much to where it becomes counterproductive. And so encouraging those cognitive breaks, whether that is just taking a breather, whether you call it meditation or you call it a moment of mindfulness, it doesn't matter as long as you're taking that pause. And then we're learning a lot about why these Zoom meetings are not necessarily giving our physical and emotional selves, the satisfaction that we had when we were in face-to-face meetings. So I was looking at some research from Jeremy Bailenson. He's a professor and a director at Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab. And so he was talking about, why doesn't this feel real to us? Because our brains can't really be tricked. And this technology actually delivers a slight delay. It's not perceptible to us what the delay is, but it is perceptible to our senses that we are not getting a real-time interaction. Because when we're communicating with each other, we are picking up so many other cues. We're picking up, hand signals and facial expressions and even microfacial expressions that really help us to understand what the other person is saying. And so our brains rely on that type of communication in order to perceive things very accurately. Scientists call it synchrony. And so when we're using technology, the synchronicity is a little bit off, just slightly, but enough for the human system to understand that this is not face-to-face and that this is not real. So here are some things that you can do or consider that I think are good best practices that I've heard out there from other experts on technology and how we're using it in the future to keep ourselves feeling very communicative, but also to feel like we're keeping ourselves well. And so one of them has to do with switching up our technology periodically. We don't always have to use the computer. Sometimes we need to switch to the mobile phone and take a walk with someone. And then also we need to think about maybe more off-screen meetings. So does everyone always need their face to be on the screen, or is it only necessary maybe for the two people that are in dialogue to the group to be on screen? So having people be able to choose or to know this meeting is an off-screen meeting. One, it takes the pressure off of doing your hair and what clothes you're gonna wear, right? But it also, it lets you know, like it's a different feeling of the meeting. And we had that in real life. We had casual meetings, and then we had very formal meetings where everyone had to be dressed up and on point for the meeting. And so we're starting to come up with some new norms about how we're gonna use technology so that it feels more natural. And since this is the way that we're gonna be working, whether we're back in the office or we're in hybrid situations, we need to start picking up on what works best for our culture. Additionally, we also need to start recommending that people take regular cycles of breaks so that they can replenish their energy and they don't get this Zoom fatigue. Some of that is coming in the way of shorter meeting mandates. Some of it is coming in the way of no meetings on certain days. And I've heard people say, it's kind of happening when we put those regulations down. It will happen over time. It just takes enough people to get on board with the new way of thinking. So you find your champions, like I'm a champion for the shorter meetings in my organization. If someone says we're gonna have a meeting, I'm like, how many, 15 minutes, 20 minutes? How much do you need? Because we're not just gonna schedule a 1 hour meeting just because anymore. And so making sure that people understand we're doing this so that you can feel better, so that you can get better work done, because all of this is not necessarily necessary. It was at the beginning of COVID. I think we all needed to see each other's faces. It was a sense of comfort. It was also a way of checking in on everyone's emotional state and seeing where people are at. But now that we've been here for a year and we're into more of a groove, it's starting to start setting what the norms are going to be for our organization. So in summary, we have talked about quite a few things, but I want you to just take away from this that great design really is about pushing the envelope and thinking about what your people need to bring their whole selves to work. And then really designing spaces for the whole person. That means their physical bodies, their minds, and how well they're able to give you their best in a day, and their social needs, whether that's virtually or in person. And then how we engage with technology should also take into account the physical, cognitive, and social needs of people and their surroundings and the furnishings and the tools that they work with in the environments in our next iteration of the workplace. Thank you so much for your engagement. I had so much fun in each of my breakout rooms. I think we should start a collaborative to start creating some of these new ergonomic pieces that we came up with. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your conference and that we'll have a rousing conversation in the next half.
Yes, thank you, Kibibi. That was amazing. Such a great way to start our morning and so much to think about. For our FMs who are online and would like to continue the conversation with Kibibi and your peers, please go to the next Zoom link. For everyone else, join us at 11:45 this morning for a quick game of Pictionary, which I think Kibibi would call a cognitive break.
Yes.
Yeah, I was paying attention. And that is before our AstraZeneca program that begins at noon. So we'll see everybody then. Thanks very much. Great morning.